His phone wouldn't stop vibrating in the cup holder. The screen kept flashing unknown caller like it was mad at him. Ethan barely noticed. He had one hand on the steering wheel and the other wrapped around a cold Starbucks cup that was sweating onto his jeans. Out on the lake, the water was doing something water wasn't supposed to do. It was circling. Fast. A tight, smooth spiral like somebody pulled a plug under the surface. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Nolan," he said, trying to keep his voice steady even as his throat went dry. "I need you to tell the marina to shut down boat traffic. Right now." The whirlpool widened, darkening at the center, and Ethan felt his chest tighten the way it did when a bill came due and he didn't have the money. A tear slid down his cheek and dropped onto the steering wheel, and he hated himself for that, hated that his body still did that at the worst times. Because the lake wasn't just acting weird. It was showing him something. Something that had been sitting beneath the bottom for a long time. And it was about to change everything. Lake Alder wasn't famous. It didn't have the postcard cliffs or the crystal blue water people put on screensavers. It was a plain reservoir outside a mid-sized town in northern Michigan, the kind of place where families came for a cheap weekend, where high school kids took prom photos by the dock, where retirees walked in the mornings with tiny dogs and travel mugs. Ethan Nolan had worked the park for 7 years. He knew which picnic tables had splinters. He knew which trail signs got stolen every summer. He knew which regulars pretended not to litter but did it anyway when they thought nobody was watching. He also knew the weight of small problems piling up until they stopped being small. His day started the same way it always did: sunrise over the water, a quick check of the boat ramp, a look at the bulletin board where someone had pinned a lost cat flyer that had been sun-faded for months. Then paperwork. Reports. Emails from the county about budget cuts that were always temporary. And then his personal life, which felt like it lived in a separate inbox that he couldn't ever get to zero. The divorce paperwork was still sitting on his kitchen counter under a stack of unopened mail. Not because he didn't care. Because he cared too much. Every time he tried to read it, his brain would start doing math. Rent. Car insurance. Dad's medication copris. The credit card balance that kept growing even when he stopped using it. He'd moved into a one-bedroom apartment 10 minutes from the park, above a nail salon that smelled like acetone all day. The walls were thin. The downstairs radio was always on. At night, he'd lie in bed listening to muffled pop songs and wonder how his life ended up feeling so temporary. Like it could be packed into 2 boxes if somebody told him to leave. His ex-wife, Marissa, didn't yell when she left. That was the worst part. She'd sat at the edge of their old couch, twisting her wedding ring like it didn't belong to her anymore. "I can't keep doing this," she'd said, and Ethan had felt his mouth open with 1,000 different arguments. But none of them were good. None of them were kind. None of them changed what was true: he had become quiet, tired, and hard to reach. Marissa wanted kids. Ethan wanted stability first. And the stability never came. Now, every few weeks, his phone would buzz with a text about paperwork or a forwarded email from the bank. Businesslike. Clean. Like their marriage had been a project that didn't meet deadlines. He tried not to think about it at work. He tried to be the guy visitors expected him to be: calm, helpful, slightly amused by people asking if bears were common. He smiled. He pointed to the right trail. He told teenagers to put out their campfires all the way. But he was always carrying something heavy inside his chest, like he'd swallowed a rock and it had settled behind his ribs. That morning, the rock felt heavier than usual. His dad's assisted living facility had called twice before 9 a.m. Ethan finally listened to the voicemail while standing by the maintenance shed, the wind cutting through his uniform jacket. "Hi, Ethan, it's Dana from Lakeside Manor. Your dad's prescription refill didn't go through. We need authorization, and also, he's been asking for you more. He's had a rough week." Ethan stared at the dusty ground. Authorization meant time on hold. Time on hold meant a late lunch. A late lunch meant getting lightheaded by 3 o'clock. He'd been skipping meals without meaning to, like his body was trying to make his life cheaper. He called the facility back and got voicemail. He left a message. He told himself he'd try again later. He told himself a lot of things like that. Around noon, he pulled into the gas station by the highway, the one with the subway inside and the bulletin board covered in business cards for drywall repair and piano lessons. He bought a coffee he didn't need because his hands felt shaky, then sat in his truck for a minute, staring out at nothing. His phone lit up again, unknown caller. He ignored it. It called again. He ignored it again. On the third call, he answered without thinking. Hello. A woman's voice came through, clipped but polite. Is this Ethan Nolan? Park ranger at Lake Alder? Yes. Who is this? My name is Lila Soto. I'm with the County Water Management Office. Ethan sat up a little. Okay. I'm sorry to bother you, she said, though she didn't sound sorry. She sounded tired. We've been getting unusual sensor readings from the reservoir. Water pressure shifts. Flow rate anomalies. It's probably nothing, but we need a visual confirmation from someone on site. Ethan looked out through his windshield toward the tree line, toward the lake beyond it. What kind of anomalies? There was a pause, like she was choosing words that wouldn't make him panic. Localized circulation. Like a draw. A pull. Ethan's stomach tightened. A draw. Like a whirlpool. Another pause. Have you seen something? He didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, he had seen something, just not today. A couple days ago, while doing a shoreline patrol, he'd noticed a patch of water near the old buoy line that looked wrong. Not dirty. Not foamy. Just unsettled. Like the surface couldn't relax. He'd written it off as wind. He'd written off a lot of things lately. I can go check, he said. Please, Lila said, and her voice softened, just a little. And Ethan, if anything looks unsafe, don't approach. Just observe and report. We don't need you playing hero. The word hero made him almost laugh. He wasn't a hero. He was a guy with overdue bills and a father slipping away in a facility that smelled like disinfectant. He was a guy who couldn't keep his marriage together. A guy who felt like he was constantly cleaning up after problems he didn't create. Yeah, he said. I'll check it out. He drove back toward the park, coffee cooling in the cup holder, his mind running in anxious circles. The sky was clear. The lake should have been calm. When he reached the overlook near the marina, he stepped out and walked to the railing. And that's when he saw it again, only now it wasn't a small patch of restless water. It was a spinning, widening circle, smooth at the edges, dark at the center, like the lake had opened its mouth. Ethan gripped the metal railing so hard his knuckles went pale. Because the longer he stared, the more he realized it wasn't just water moving. It was water revealing. And something down there, something buried under years of silt and silence, was finally coming back up. Ethan didn't go closer to the edge. He stayed where he was, boots planted on cracked concrete, doing exactly what the training video said to do when something didn't make sense. Observe. Breathe. Call it in. Still, his body leaned forward like it had its own opinion. The whirlpool wasn't violent. That was the strange part. No splashing. No chaos. Just a steady pull, quiet and patient, as if the lake had all the time in the world. He raised his radio. Dispatch, I'm at the marina overlook. We've got visible circular motion near buoy marker 4. It's stable, but it's definitely there. Static crackled back, then a voice. Copy that. County's already been notified. Can you estimate size? Ethan squinted. The circle was maybe 15 feet across now, the center darker than the rest, like the water had depth instead of reflection. 15 feet. Maybe growing. Understood. Keep distance. He lowered the radio and exhaled slowly. His phone buzzed again in his pocket, the same persistent vibration, the same unknown number. This time, he answered. Ethan Nolan, he said. Hi. This is Lila. I'm guessing you're seeing it now. Her voice sounded different than it had earlier. Less official. More human. Yeah, he said. I'm seeing it. I'm pulling live data, she said. And I know this sounds strange, but the pressure pattern suggests there's a void beneath the lakebed. Not natural erosion. Something structured. Ethan frowned. Structured how? Another pause. Like man-made. but old. He rubbed his forehead with his thumb. There's nothing down there. This reservoir was built in the 70s. They cleared the area. That's what the records say, Lila replied. But records aren't always complete. Ethan watched the water. The whirlpool didn't feel threatening. It felt intentional. That thought made him uncomfortable, so he pushed it away. Okay, he said. So what do you need from me? Honestly, she said, and for the first time she sounded unsure. I need eyes. And someone who actually knows this place. Maps don't tell you how people used land before it was flooded. That landed harder than she probably intended. Ethan knew the park, but he also knew the town. He knew the stories old-timers told at diners. He knew about the church that had been moved plank by plank before the reservoir filled. He knew about the cemetery they relocated, and the one they didn't. There were homes down there, he said quietly, before the water. I know, Lila said. And that's why I'm calling you. County trucks started arriving an hour later. 2 white SUVs, an unmarked pickup, people in windbreakers with clipboards and serious expressions. The marina was taped off. Curious visitors lingered behind barriers, phones held up, trying to get a video that would go viral without understanding what they were filming. Ethan stayed near the edge but out of the way, answering questions when asked. Time blurred the way it always did during something unexpected, too fast and too slow at the same time. That was when he noticed her. She stood apart from the others, leaning against an old wooden bench, hands shoved into the pockets of a faded hoodie. Mid-40s, maybe. Brown hair pulled back without care. She watched the water without recording it. When their eyes met, she nodded once. Not polite. Not curious. Just acknowledging. After a while, she walked over. They finally noticed it, her, she said. Ethan turned toward her. Noticed what? She gestured with her chin toward the whirlpool. That. His ranger instincts kicked in. This area's restricted right now. I know, she said calmly. I used to live here. Before it was water. That stopped him. My family's house, she continued, was right about there. She pointed to a spot just off-center from the whirlpool. Blue siding. Big oak out front. My dad planted it himself. Ethan swallowed. What's your name? Rachel, she said. Rachel Moore. He looked again at the water. The dark center seemed deeper now, as if the lake were peeling back a layer. They told us everything was cleared, Ethan said. Rachel smiled, but there was no humor in it. They tell people a lot of things. Lila approached from behind, phone still pressed to her ear. She stopped when she saw Rachel. Who's this? A former resident, Ethan said. Before the reservoir. Rachel crossed her arms. We moved. But not everything did. Lila studied her, then the water. We're detecting debris. Large. Fixed. Rachel nodded slowly. There was a storm the year before they flooded it. My dad had already passed, and the house was half empty. They said we had time to finish moving things. We didn't. Ethan felt a tightness behind his eyes. What things? Rachel hesitated. Then, personal things. Photos. Letters. Stuff that matters more when it's gone. The whirlpool shifted, widening just enough to make a few people gasp. Under the surface, something dark and straight became visible for a second before the water closed over it again. A wall. Or what used to be one. Ethan felt the weight in his chest shift. Not lighter. Just different. He thought about the boxes in his apartment he hadn't unpacked. The voicemail from his dad. The divorce papers sitting untouched. Lila cleared her throat. Rachel, would you be willing to talk to us? About what might still be down there. Rachel looked at the water again. I've been waiting years for someone to ask. As the afternoon wore on, the situation stayed controlled. No collapse. No emergency. Just slow revelation. Divers weren't sent in yet. That would take permits. Planning. Time. But something had already changed. As the crowd thinned, Ethan found himself sitting on the bench beside Rachel, both of them watching the lake like it was a person they were trying to understand. "You work here a long time?" she asked. 7 years, he said. She nodded. Funny how places keep secrets longer than people. He thought about that. About how the lake hadn't destroyed what was underneath. It had just covered it. Preserved it in a way. "Yeah," he said. "Funny." When his phone buzzed again, he didn't dread it this time. He checked the screen. It was the assisted living facility. Ethan stood up. "I need to take this." Rachel smiled softly. "Go." He walked a few steps away and answered. "Hi. This is Ethan." "Your dad's having a good afternoon," the nurse said. "He keeps asking if you're coming by soon." Ethan looked back at the lake. At the slow, steady movement that had brought something buried back into the light. "Yeah," he said, his voice steady. "I am." And for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like a promise he couldn't keep. By the third day, the lake stopped spinning. Not all at once. It slowed the way a thought fades when you don't fight it anymore. The circle softened, the dark center lightened, and eventually the water looked like water again. Calm. Ordinary. Almost innocent. That somehow made everything heavier. Ethan stood with his hands on his hips, staring out across the surface, trying to reconcile what he'd seen with what was now in front of him. Temporary fencing still ringed the marina. County trucks came and went. Signs warned visitors to stay back. But to anyone driving past, it just looked like a normal lake on a normal weekday. The proof of what was underneath existed now only in data files, sonar scans, and the quiet agreement among a few people that something important had been disturbed. Lila had shown him the images that morning in the back of her SUV. Grainy outlines. Straight edges where nature didn't make them. A roofline slanted under layers of silt. "It's not dangerous," she'd said, like she was trying to convince herself as much as him. "Structurally, it's holding. But it shouldn't be there." Ethan nodded, but his mind wasn't on the engineering. It was on the idea of something surviving under pressure for decades. Something unseen, but not gone. He felt that way about himself more than he liked to admit. After his shift, he drove straight to the assisted living facility. He didn't go home first. Didn't change. Didn't talk himself out of it like he usually did. The lobby smelled like lemon cleaner and something faintly medicinal. The TV near the front desk played a game show nobody was watching. Dana, the receptionist, looked up and smiled when she saw him. "He's in the common room," she said quietly. "Good day today." Ethan nodded and walked down the hallway, his boots sounding too loud against the floor. His dad sat near the window, wrapped in a thin cardigan even though it wasn't cold. His hair had gone almost completely white. His hands rested on the arms of the chair like they weren't sure what to do anymore. "Hey, Dad," Ethan said. His father turned slowly. For a moment, there was nothing behind his eyes. Then something clicked into place. "There you are," his dad said, relief washing over his face. "I thought you got lost." Ethan forced a smile and pulled up a chair. "No. Just busy." His dad laughed softly. "You always were." They sat in silence for a bit, watching cars pass in the parking lot. Ethan waited for the right thing to say, but nothing came. So he said the thing that felt most honest. "I've been tired," he said. His dad nodded, like this made perfect sense. That happens when you carry too much by yourself. Ethan swallowed. He stared at the floor, at the scuffed linoleum that had probably seen 1,000 versions of this same conversation. "I don't know how to stop," he admitted. "Every time I try to fix one thing, something else falls apart." His dad's hand trembled slightly as he lifted it and placed it over Ethan's. The skin was thin. Fragile. Still warm. "You don't fix a whole life at once," his dad said. "You fix what's right in front of you." The words hit harder than any advice ever had. Because they didn't feel like advice. They felt like permission. That night, back in his apartment, Ethan sat at the small kitchen table with the divorce papers spread out in front of him. He didn't rush. He read every line. He let himself feel the sadness instead of pushing it aside. When he finished, he signed. His hand shook, but he didn't stop. He scanned the documents and emailed them back to Marissa's lawyer. Then, on impulse, he opened a new message to Marissa herself. He stared at the blank screen for a long time before typing. "I hope you're okay. I'm trying to be." He didn't expect a reply. He didn't need one. Just sending it felt like releasing something he'd been holding underwater. The next day at the lake, Rachel was there again. She stood near the water with a small notebook in her hands, jotting things down, then stopping to stare like she was trying to memorize the way the light hit the surface. "They're going to drain part of it," she said when Ethan joined her. "Just enough to document what's there. Then they'll cover it again." "Does that bother you?" he asked. She thought about it. "A little. But mostly I'm glad someone finally saw it. That it wasn't erased. Just hidden." Ethan nodded. "That still counts." Rachel looked at him. "You okay?" The question caught him off guard. He considered lying, then decided not to. "I think I'm getting there," he said. She smiled, small and real. "That's usually how it starts." Later that afternoon, Ethan sat alone on the dock, boots dangling above the water. The lake was still now. No movement. No signs of what lay beneath. But he knew it was there. He thought about how much of his life he'd spent trying to keep things calm on the surface. How much he'd avoided looking at what was pulling at him from below. The fear. The grief. The feeling of not being enough. Ignoring it hadn't made it disappear. It had just waited. The realization hurt. But it also made something clear. He didn't need to drain the whole lake to move forward. He just needed to stop pretending there was nothing under the surface. As the sun dipped lower, his phone buzzed in his pocket. This time, he smiled before answering. "Hey," he said. "Yeah, I can talk." And for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to hear whatever came next. The county drained a narrow section of the lake over the next 2 weeks. Not enough to expose everything. Just enough to document, measure, and then decide what would be left alone. Ethan watched the process from a distance. Pumps hummed. Muddy shoreline appeared where water used to be. The smell of wet earth filled the air, sharp and honest. It reminded him of being a kid, digging holes without knowing what he was looking for. They found the remains of 3 houses. Partial foundations. Staircases that led nowhere. A porch roof collapsed inward, preserved in a way that felt almost respectful. Nature hadn't destroyed it. Time hadn't either. It had simply waited. Rachel was there every day. Sometimes she talked. Sometimes she just stood with her arms wrapped around herself, eyes fixed on the ground like she was listening to something only she could hear. One afternoon, she asked Ethan if he wanted to see something. She led him to the edge of the drained section and pointed to a dark shape half buried in silt. A mailbox. Bent. Rusted. The numbers barely visible. "That was ours," she said. Ethan nodded. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. A week later, the water began to rise again. Slowly. Carefully. The lake reclaimed what it had given back. The surface smoothed over. The shoreline returned to what visitors expected it to look like. Ordinary. Peaceful. Most people moved on. Ethan didn't. Something in him had shifted, not dramatically, not all at once. Just enough that the days didn't blur together the way they used to. He started packing lunches instead of skipping them. Simple stuff. Sandwiches. Apples. He set reminders on his phone, not for emergencies, but for small things. Call Dad. Pay bill. Take a walk. He went to see his father twice a week instead of once. Some days his dad remembered everything. Some days he remembered almost nothing. Ethan learned to meet him where he was instead of wishing for where he used to be. One afternoon, his dad looked at him suddenly and said, "You look lighter." Ethan laughed. "I don't think that's how it works." His dad smiled anyway. "Sure it is." At work, Ethan asked for a meeting with his supervisor. It took him 3 tries to work up the nerve. When he finally sat down in the cramped office, knees bouncing, he said the words slowly so they wouldn't come out wrong. "I can't keep covering extra shifts without burning out. I need a schedule that actually works." His supervisor looked surprised, then thoughtful, then tired in the same way Ethan was tired. Okay, she said. Let's see what we can do. It wasn't a raise. It wasn't a promotion. But it was a boundary. And it held. Rachel stopped coming to the lake every day. Before she left for good, she found Ethan by the dock. I'm going to sell the old family place, she said. The one that's still on land. It's time. That sounds hard, Ethan said. She nodded. It is. But it also feels right. She hesitated, then added, thanks for listening. You didn't have to. He shrugged. Neither did the lake. But it did. She smiled at that and handed him her notebook. I wrote some things down. In case you ever wonder what was under there. Ethan took it. He didn't open it right away. Life didn't magically improve. Some nights were still quiet in a way that felt lonely instead of peaceful. Bills still came. The future still felt uncertain more often than not. But when those moments hit, Ethan didn't push them down anymore. He let them exist. On a cool evening in early fall, Ethan sat in his truck by the marina after his shift. The lake was glassy, reflecting the sky in muted blues and grays. No whirlpool. No movement. Just water doing what water does. He opened Rachel's notebook. Inside were simple entries. Descriptions of rooms. The sound of her dad's laugh. A memory of sitting on the porch steps, feet dangling, watching fireflies. Ordinary things. Precious because they were ordinary. Ethan closed the notebook and rested it on the dashboard. His phone buzzed. A text from Marissa. Hey. Got your message. I'm glad you're trying. I hope you keep going. He stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he typed back. I will. He didn't feel closure. Not the kind people talk about like it's a door that slams shut. What he felt was steadier than that. Like standing on solid ground and knowing there was water beneath it, but also knowing it didn't have to pull him under. Ethan stepped out of the truck and walked to the edge of the dock. The lake was quiet. Still hiding what it always had. He thought about how many people walked past this water every day without knowing what it held. How many people did the same thing with each other. Maybe that was okay. Maybe the point wasn't to expose everything. Maybe it was to acknowledge that depth exists even when you can't see it. He took a breath, longer than usual, and let it out. Tomorrow, he'd wake up and do it again. Not perfectly. Not easily. But honestly. And sometimes, that was enough.